I'm Melissa Shanahan, and this is the Velocity Work Podcast, live episode number 116. Welcome to Velocity Work Live, where we interview guests who have reached success on their own terms and are not hustling. They're not in a grinding phase. They may have goals, they may be reaching for things, but they're in a very different space than when they were first lifting their business off the ground. And so there's no better guest to bring on than Ernie Svenson of Law Firm Autopilot. Ernie, the attorney, thank you for
Hey,
being here with me.
thank you for having me. And wow, I mean, that's like I have a lot to live up to here. I don't think I can. I'm not the
I,
best, but I
oh my
certainly am
God,
happy to be here.
you you are the perfect example to me of someone who, and I want to actually talk to you about the early stages of when you were getting the business off of the ground. But I've had many conversations with you, and you are so chill about
Mm,
like you don't have a graspiness with your business. There's no
mm,
desperation. You don't need something from your business. It's
mm,
just it's running the way it's running. And of course you do new things. And of course you're shooting for it's there's a fulfillment there in what you're doing and kind of playing with things and really enjoying the growth that's happening
hmm.
instead of needing the growth, needing more customers, needing the income, which, when you're first starting out, most people do need some of that, right?
Yeah,
So let's go back to
yeah.
when you were first lifting off the ground Law Firm Autopilot or your own thing. Maybe it wasn't called that right away,
Hmm.
but when you made the call to make that switch, make that jump, and you were just starting this off, if I were to ask you, it feels like a loaded question, but if
Yeah.
I were to ask you, how did you lift this thing off the ground? Like, tell us about that. Like the very first year, for example.
Yeah. Well, okay, so it started with me leaving the big firm that I went into after I got out of law school, clerked for a judge for 2 years, and then went to the big fancy tall building law firm because they paid a lot of money, they did interesting work. I never thought that I could ever work in such a place because I had historically always been a really bad student until I got to law school. And I was just kind of exhilarated by, and intoxicated would be a better word, by the idea that I could go into this world. And so I had major imposter syndrome.
Mm.
But then I quickly figured out, like, well, actually, I know stuff. I can figure stuff out, most importantly. And a lot of people here are faking it and not making it. And,
Mm.
it's okay. So, I did, went reverted to my usual, okay, it's fine if I fall down a few times and trip up and things like that. So once I realized that, it's not a game that could be mastered, either the practicing of law or the running of the business. um, I just started to feel more embattled by the overhead, the bureaucracy, the excess, the lumbering quality of it. And I guess I realized, that I had accidentally gone into a place that really wasn't suited for me because I'm more, entrepreneurial, innovate, don't do things just for the sake of doing them the way they've always been done. So it started to frustrate me to be in a big firm, but I really didn't know how I was going to leave. And then Hurricane Katrina hit New Orleans. And I realized, like, a lot of the things I thought were benefits were actually deficits in the big firm. Their
Mhm.
exceptional resources only worked in the tall building and not anywhere else. And the people only could work together in the tall building and nowhere else. And people depended on each other and couldn't figure things out for themselves and weren't self-sufficient.
Mm.
And my nature growing up, because of my upbringing, my background, I had to figure things out as a kid. And at first I didn't like it, but turns out to be a good life skill.
Mhm.
So I think that's what all set me up to say, okay, I'm going to go out on my own because I just can't take this anymore. I had no plan. I was just like, where's the ejector seat? Push, hope the parachute works. And then I started figuring out how to be a solo lawyer. And then from there, I started figuring out how to be a non lawyer who helps people uh, using technology, teaching them
So,
technology.
okay. Okay, take me back to when you were starting the business, I mean, was it a clean cut or was there a transition?
It was pretty clean cut because I remember this moment vividly. It was Katrina happened. The city had been evacuated for 6 weeks. Nobody could come back in the city, but I managed to squeak in, and the firm, was like, yeah, okay, fine. If you want to try to work from New Orleans, that's great. And I was just, in my house, and I was sitting in the backyard, and there was a blue sky, beautiful day, crisp, nice weather, perfect weather. And the phone rang, and it was my friend, from law school, but he was on the compensation committee of the firm, and he's calling to do the yearly, hey, what do you want me to tell the compensation committee? So this is this whole political move, like, it's like a politician. They go around and ask everybody, how do you want me to advocate your case? As though they're only advocating for you, right? Because they're advocating for everybody, but this is like a show that they put on. And, he was my friend, but, he had a role. And so he had to play that role. And I was like, oh God, here we go again with this stuff. And I was like, well, I didn't really have a great year last year. I'm thinking in my head as he's asking me this question. And I'm probably not going to have another good one because I am not into this anymore. I am into figuring out technology, and I'm figuring out how to be self-sufficient, which is diametrically opposed to everything that's going on in this firm. And I swear, literally, the words came out of my mouth that I was thinking but hadn't planned to say.
Yeah.
And I was just trying it on. I said, well, Steve, I had a really bad year last year. I'm probably going to have another bad year this year. He's like, and he calls me Sven. And he's like, Sven, like, really? I mean, that what you want me to tell him? And it was like, I mean, I think of the movie Office Space, where the guy just starts to live a different life and it's insane. That was literally the same thing for me. I was just like, yeah, fine. I'm just going to like say what's on my mind. And if they fire me, they fire me, And he's like, well, okay, and then so he didn't accept that as an answer. Like, well, that's not really going to work. What are you really thinking here? I was like, and then I said the thing that I'd played with this thought a lot, but I never had committed to it in my head. And I said, well, Steve, actually, I'm thinking what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave and go out on my own. So it doesn't really matter what you tell him. I'm leaving to go out on my own and start a solo practice. That like blew him away because we were good friends and we generally shared this information. And I mean, I was as shocked as he was because but I just couldn't take it anymore. And that's what I mean by I pushed the ejector button. That was the moment. And what's funny is he was like, well, I'm going to tell him the meeting's in like, 3 days. So if you change your mind, let me know. I said, no, I'm not going to change my mind, and he was very hesitant, but we hung up. And I remember thinking, wow, I pushed the ejector button. And I sat back and I looked up at that sky and I was like, wow, I feel such relief. And I thought, how can you feel relief? You don't have a plan. You just thought of this. You could never go and tell people that this is a way that they should do it. No one else should ever do it this way. I don't know, maybe I should have done something different, but it worked for me because I pushed the button, I escaped, I started my own practice. That worked. I used technology. I mean, part of it was I wanted to prove like either this technology stuff is really going to help solo lawyers practice in a different way, and I'm going to be one of the early guinea pigs into space, and I'll either die in space, like the first dog they sent up into space, or I'll survive. And then I'll go, okay, well, that worked. Let's keep doing it. And so it worked. And then other lawyers wanted to know, well, wait a second, I want to do what you're doing. You seem pretty chill, and you seem like you have a really, few moving parts, less stressful way of practicing. I'm like, yeah, I do. I don't have any paper. I don't need an office. It's pretty damn good. And I can do a lot of stuff from anywhere. And so they asked me to show them what I could do, how I'd done it. I did. People kept inviting me to speak. Eventually, they started paying me to speak. And I thought, there's a business model here.
Okay. So, wow. Before you even said, before you said I had thought these things, but they came out of my mouth. And then I was thinking, oh my gosh, that I was thinking as you're sharing the conversation, what guts it takes.
It wasn't guts. It was not guts.
So then you clarified. Yeah.
It was not guts. It was overwhelm. I just couldn't take it
Yeah.
anymore. It was just so much BS, so
Yeah.
much ridiculous, unnecessary stuff. And I was just like, I can't be here anymore. I
Yeah.
have to be somewhere else. I mean, it was during Katrina, I even toyed, like, I would have these fantasies of like, oh, well, I just want to, what was the last really good job I had before I even entered law? I was like, oh, it's waiting tables. Oh, restaurants need waiters. I could go back to waiting tables. That's how desperate in my mind I was to do something
Yeah.
different than what I was doing. Of course, waiting tables is in no way going to approximate the compensation I needed, so
Yeah.
that idea wasn't the one I
Okay. So how long
adopted.
after that did you quit?
Oh, well, right. So right then and there, that conversation was in late February, yeah, mid February. And he said, well, and that was another question. He said, well, when do you thinking you're going to go out on your own? And again, he's thinking I'm going to say 6 months. I said, next March, which was next month, which gave me like 3 weeks to get ready. And I thought, that's it. That's, if I don't do it fast, I mean, I
Yeah.
kind of knew instinctively, if I don't do it fast, if I give myself more time to think about it, I'll find reasons why it doesn't make sense. And of course, people came to see me and say, oh, we want you to stay. You could be of counsel and have your, we can do whatever you want to do so that you stay. We like you. We want you to stay, just make it. And I was like, no, I've tried everything I can here to make it work. Like, but you guys don't like technology. You don't get it. You don't want to use it. And look at Katrina. You're all running around in circles trying to, find your little black book that you left back on your desk or whatever thing it was that they weren't doing that they could have been doing. And I was like, I can't move the battleship. I just put me on a little, small inflatable boat off to the side and I'll just go in my own direction.
Yeah. Okay. That's so great. What month was that? Oh, you said March.
March of
Okay.
2006.
Okay. So did you have the means to just kind of rest back a little bit, or did you like you
No,
needed to make money, right?
no, I needed
I
to make money.
imagine.
I mean, I needed to make money and I had ongoing matters. And I felt like, I know that these matters, I can depend on making X amount. I knew roughly what I could make for at least 6, months to 12 months. And I knew which clients, or I thought I knew which clients would go with me. And
Okay.
in 80% of the cases, I was correct. I mean, it was conservative, but in 80%
Yeah.
of the cases, I was correct. But one of the cases was kind of surprising to me because that was the one that I thought for sure would go with me was one that it was a patent litigation type case where the law firm that did the patent work just needed local counsel to just be their contact with the local federal court. And one of the things I thought that I would be able to develop as a business model, I was hoping would work, which had nothing to do with technology, but was just like, well, when they hire Gordon Arata, the firm I was with, and pay us a lot of money to be local counsel, really, it goes from either just rubber stamping what they tell us to file and just be on the pleadings because they needed that to offering some advice. And I wouldn't take the rubber stamping cases unless I trusted the people to do the right thing. But the firm would. So that was one where I didn't, I was like, I'm not going to do that, but I'll take the ones that if they want me to just be on the pleadings, but I trust them because they know what they're doing. Yeah, fine. But in most cases, the ones that trust you that way, and then I trust, we're going to ask me my opinion. And I knew how that court worked. I mean, I had clerked for one of the judges who was really good there for 2 years. And afterwards, he set up the inner court group. And, so I knew all those federal judges when I was there and on an ongoing basis. So I knew how that court worked. And that information was valuable. And I figured that this guy would keep me on, and he would have, except that the client was like, I don't know, do we want a guy that's a solo lawyer? Won't they get jammed? Won't they have these problems? And they had all these fears that I was like, oh, how interesting. Like, none of these fears are valid. Like, if you're doing all the work and all I have to do is file it, and e-filing was coming into existence at this time, it's like, where is there going to be the bottleneck? There's not going to be one. But they just couldn't wrap their head around it. So they kept Gordon Arata, and then another client that I thought was going to keep Gordon Arata shifted to me for exactly that reason. Like, oh, we just use you for your advice, and
Hmm.
surely you'll
Okay.
figure it out or engage people or do whatever you need to do. We've trusted you, so we trust you and not the institution. So it
Mhm.
was kind of interesting to see how people didn't get that. And that's probably where, if I knew what I know now about marketing, I wouldn't have assumed that they would just understand the benefits. I'd know that I have to explain it to them
Yeah.
carefully. So,
Yeah. Oh, that's so interesting. Okay. Uh yeah, so knowing what you know now, you probably could have converted them
mhm.
if you
Or I'd
knew
have had
that.
a better chance. I mean, I
Yeah.
just assumed that's the problem with a lot of marketing. You just assume people are going to know your value, and you can't do that. You have to break it down and explain it to them
Yeah.
and persuade them.
Yeah. Um, interestingly, so I guess I would say this to you in a one-off conversation, but other people might be interested in knowing this. Uh, have you heard of the book $100 Million Offer? It's
No.
new and it's like a
Mm,
dollar on, I haven't read it yet. A
mm,
dollar on Amazon for like the Kindle version. But Joey Vitale this morning in the sprint call, his lesson was around something he got from that book, which gave a calculation for the value of the thing that you're trying to sell, which was
mm,
so interesting. But he was
mm,
talking about and the calculation will actually help you convey the value because you have to
mm.
articulate what it is to be able to put it into an equation. And uh, I don't know. Sorry for listeners. I don't know the
Oh, no.
equation off the top of my head, but so he
Just
said he
get the
was,
book.
yeah, he said he was really floored by it, that he'd
Huh.
never seen it talked about in that way. And it just goes like with what you're saying. You have to be able to articulate the value to people. And
Yeah.
that's a tough learning curve, I think. Um,
It is because people have a mindset, and I see this constantly, and I see it because I had the mindset, right? Like
yeah.
if all you've ever done is, well, one, not think about value at all, just say, well, my value is like, at Gordon Rada they charge $350 an hour for my time, so that must be my value. Well, how did they come up with that number? I don't know,
Right.
they just came up with it. And our value is based on, we're trading time for services. And so the business model of lawyers is kind of flawed because you have this inherent conflict with your clients, because you make more money if you're charging by the hour, the more hours you spend. So what's your incentive to find quick solutions, or to say, well, the risk of this is not worth the time spent. So we're, like, you say, oh, we can't tolerate risk. We're just going to do everything we can. We're going to turn over every stone. Clients actually don't want that. They just don't know how to tell you, and they assume you would know, that you, the lawyer, would know what you probably shouldn't do. And then they get these fat bills and they're like, oh, okay. So they've learned, right? So that system doesn't work. But then if you're transitioning away from billing for your time, and you say, well, I'm going to bill for value, this is flat fee pricing. Well, what's the value? Where's the happy marriage of the two? Of the one, the client wants something that they can afford and they're willing to pay for, and you need to make a profit, and it's going to take time, but you have to figure out how much time these things generally take. Well, that's what businesses do, right? And if you can't figure it out, then maybe that's not where you start with building your flat fee model. And
Mhm.
then once you get a flat fee model that works, you're going to find, like, wow, I like this. This is great. Like,
Mhm.
I get more people to sign up. It's more cost efficient for them. It's effective for me, and I can scale this better. Like, it's
Mhm.
higher, like, so lawyers have had to learn this. And I was one of those lawyers. And, you just don't tend to think, like, what's the value to the client? That's what they're looking for. I
Yeah.
mean, if you make $1 million problem go away for $10,000, they're happy.
Yeah. Totally. Yeah. So, okay, I'm thinking back to when you left, you had some client work to do. And then when did you start? So I guess my question is, when you started, was it Law Firm Autopilot from the get-go?
Oh, no, no. I started my solo practice, did that for
Right.
7 to 8 years. And then I started doing they overlapped. So I was doing
Uh-huh.
the side gig business because people were saying, well, I want to pay you for, for this extra service. I was like, oh, great. And then I realized I could even run my own events, and I
Uh-huh.
was, getting CLE credit and running my own events, and that was making money. And I was like, wow, this is great. And then we started doing online CLE, because I had a partner at the time, and I thought, this is amazing. They click a button, money goes into the bank account, they watch a video, and we don't even have to show up. We just process the 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 their CLE credit and give it to the CLE authorities. And I was like, huh, what else can I do that's like this? And that's right about the
Mm.
time that people are starting to offer online education, online consulting, and those kinds of things. And I thought, I could probably do this and probably would enjoy this more, because this is, less dependent
Mhm.
on things outside of myself. So that whole thing about being self-sufficient that I mentioned
Mm.
earlier, that was always in the back of my mind. Like, how can I do more where I don't depend on me being in a certain place, me having all this equipment, me paying rent for this office that I only use sometimes? How can I maximize what technology has enabled? And teaching people and helping people online, is like the supreme maximization of that.
Yeah. Yeah. So so it was a transition into, well, when you started doing sort of one-off things, or you did the CLE work and it was like, huh, okay,
Hmm.
maybe I can do other things with this. That was the beginning of what now is Law Firm Autopilot. When did it solidify into, when did you create a business for it specifically?
So I think when I realized that I needed to take the business to another level was, um, I realized that the marketing magic that I had with my solo firm, because I had started the fifth blog by a lawyer and
Mhm.
had all this acclaim and attention and awareness and all that stuff that you now is hard to get. I had it simply by virtue of that fact. And that magic started not to work. And it definitely didn't work as well when I transitioned to a completely new thing, because at that point, people, your brand is one thing, and now you have to rebrand and rethink the message and all that kind of stuff. And that's when I started to realize, in a dim kind of primitive, one-celled organism crawling out of the primordial soup kind of way, I started to realize, like, I don't really know marketing. Like, it's not
Mm.
as easy as just get a website,
No.
because everybody has a website now, and that's not just the only thing you need. And so I started looking around and research and read more. And I was like, oh, there's actually a methodology to this. And oh, look at this. There are a whole bunch of people, non-lawyers, of course, because lawyers are going to figure this out last, but non-lawyers who figured out that they could build an online business
Mm.
and sell information products. Dan Kennedy was one of them. Tim Ferriss was one of them. And I was like, oh, wow, okay. And Tim Ferriss was really the one who, like, his book, 4 Hour Work Week, opened my eyes. And I was like, okay, well, how do we do this? And so I treated it like a legal research project, where I wanted to see as many different people as possible so I could see what the commonalities were. And I spent a lot of time, energy, money researching that. And then I realized, okay, that was my problem. I'm not clear in my marketing. And so I hired somebody to help me redo my website homepage. And I paid her $997, which to me was like, this is ridiculous. $900 for a homepage? My God, this is crazy. Because I had been
Right.
like kludging things together,
Right.
and my mindset was like, spend as little money as possible, because that's what's so amazing about digital, is that it's inexpensive. And then I realized, like, no, knowledge and wisdom matter, and you can't only get them from books. You
Mhm.
can try, but that takes longer, and you have less confidence that you're doing it the right way. So I paid her. She looked at my email marketing. She's like, Ernie, what are you doing? You're asking people for email addresses and saying just subscribe and nothing more. You're not explaining the benefits. Okay,
Mm.
here, let me help you with that. And so she changed some things. I was like, oh my God, look at that. So much more effective
Yeah.
when somebody who knows what they're doing with marketing takes the steering wheel. So that's when I
Yeah.
really went to town on learning marketing.
Okay. Oh, and how, so what year did you first uh, what year did Law Firm Autopilot begin? Even though there was a really soft beginning for a long time.
So paperless chase, if I looked at my LinkedIn profile, I think that started in 2012, and that was the name of the company.
Oh, okay.
Well, it was actually another name that I won't even get into, but it was paperless chase was when I realized like niche marketing, what am I going to be known for? I got to pick one thing out of this digital grab bag. So I said, well, I'll just teach people about being paperless. That'll be the focus. So that was the name of the company. So 2012, I was still practicing law. Then Law Firm Autopilot was a newer name, newer branding, and I forget when that came into existence. But paperless chase 2012 was when
Uh-huh.
I really started to say, okay, I'm going to make this work. It was
That's
still
so
overlapping, but I'd say for 2 years, then, it was all in on just no practicing of law.
what's interesting. I mean, I know most of the people listening to this will be attorneys. Um, but the show is not about attorneys, right? It just happens to
Mm-hmm.
be that. But I I agree with, so Allie Katz was on your podcast recently.
Mm-hmm.
And she said something that was like, yes, yes, yes. Like there's something,
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of like I knew it in the back of my mind, but I had never said it that way, that attorneys are really lucky that they have a skill to build a business around. It's a very
Mm-hmm.
clear, if they want to go out on their own, there's some clarity there.
Yeah.
And the difference between that, and it's an advantage, by the way, but well, you could argue there's advantages on both sides, but the difference between that and what you're explaining is you had to follow your nose and find your way to what this business was.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the coolest thing to me. You know, I think that's why a lot of people in the world, non-attorneys is kind of what I'm talking about right now, but I think that's why a lot of people don't become entrepreneurs, is because you have an innate curiosity that, well, there's a lot of characteristics that I think lend itself to this with you, but you have an innate curiosity. You just keep following your nose and you keep,
Yeah.
I can like see your head back then, like kind of cock your head to the side, like, and then you kind of go with the next thing. And it built onto itself to pretty quickly to be the beginning of what blossomed into what you have now. But
Yeah.
I don't know if you agree with that or not, but it strikes me as there's advantages on both sides, I think. But
Yeah.
it's go ahead.
Yeah. I think so. I've been thinking about like, how do I explain, my origin story? Because there's another thing you have to do in marketing is and you should do it if for no other reasons than just to better understand what your strengths, weaknesses, and all that kind of stuff
Mm,
are. And so when taking inventory, like, okay, well, what things was I naturally going to do anyway that
mhm,
benefited me? And so, like I said earlier, in my upbringing, I had to figure things out on my own as a kid. My parents were in a custody battle and they were busy doing different things. And they also, they were naturally people who had to figure things out on their own and they traveled. And so their attitude about raising a child, they're the opposite of helicopter parents. They
mm.
got in the helicopter and flew away, and left me and
Yeah.
my brother to figure things out, which was, I mean, I wasn't even perplexed by that or unsettled by that. I was unsettled by other things, but it was like most of my life was, yeah, just figure it out. And that turns out to be in this new world where we've had radical shift away from a traditional way of working in the traditional industrial age to this knowledge worker age, but then adding on to it the digital part, because you know in the early part of the 20th century, Peter Drucker talked about knowledge workers. I think he's the one who came up with the term, namely, people who think for a living. So if you're a manager in a business, you think for a living, you're a knowledge worker. And the knowledge worker business has become really big now.
Mhm,
And, so thinking for a living is what lawyers do. Like we were knowledge
mhm,
workers always.
mhm,
And now we are knowledge workers in a digital age, a globalized internet driven age. So the
mhm,
opportunities are many to reach people who want to engage our thinking services and pay us a lot of money for high level thinking, not low level thinking.
mhm,
The problem is most of us are mired down in the putting out fires, the data wrangling, information processing, that's low level work that is either being automated, outsourced to low wage places, or it shouldn't even be done at all. And so if you're down there doing that, you're creating a better, like the time is over to create LegalZoom. That was created by LegalZoom. But there was a guy named Ted Nicholas who did this in 1997, who wasn't even a lawyer, and made millions of dollars selling forms online. Lawyers could have figured that out. That's easy now. What's harder now is using critical thinking skills to solve high level problems for people who want those kind of problems solved. But here you have the same problem I had discussed earlier, which is if that's what you do, and you should be doing that, and you can be doing that if you're a lawyer, presumably, well, then you need to communicate to the client how that works. Why should they hire you to do that?
Mm-hmm.
Why is that a valuable thing? And it's a new thing. So clients aren't going, get me search the web for lawyers who provide critical thinking skills. That's not going to show up in a Google search.
Mm-hmm.
And people aren't going to search for that. So you have to explain it to them. Look, I can solve your problem. Now, here's the simplest explanation for that. I will charge a flat fee for this. They're like, oh, well, you figured this out. But that's still kind of low level, right? If it's flat fee, regular work, subscription-based pricing, now we're moving into a higher level because you're saying you're going to need me to answer these kind of questions on an ongoing basis. I've figured out a good value exchange for you and me to do this. But that needs to be explained to people because, one, they're not expecting it from most lawyers. And secondly, they're going to assume it just naturally benefits the lawyer. People are very suspicious of how lawyers charge for things. So you need to figure all that out. But that's what your critical thinking skills are for, right? You should be able to figure this out. And there are other people who have figured it out. So you don't have to figure it out on your own. You can find people who have figured it out. And that's where I save myself time and energy, not as quickly as I would have liked, but eventually I figured out, oh, wait, there's other people who've already figured this out. And a lot of it also is not, oh, let me chase people who are teaching the new shiny object thing. It's more like, well, what are the timeless principles here? Like Jeff Bezos was asked, and I think this is kind of a famous question. Oh, well, what's the new thing? Where are we going? And Bezos like, new thing. I'm looking for things that have been around that aren't changing. That's what I'm looking for. That's what I can build a business around. Like if things are changing all the time, that's not sure footing that I'm on. That's things that changing too much. So in a world that's changing a lot, you have to figure out what parts of this are essential and timeless and build your foundation on that. But that's part of your critical thinking skills, is to figure that out and figure out how to build a business around that, whether it's as a traditional lawyer or it's as a lawyer who's doing, not representing clients with legal problems. But it doesn't matter because lawyers can do work that's not traditionally legal, just like people who are not lawyers, because this is happening now, can invade the previously only lawyers could do this world.
Right.
That's why that guy, Ted Nicholas, in 1997, figured out how to sell forms online and made millions of dollars. This is a case study that came out of Dan Kennedy's book. I forget what it's called, something like How to Make Money with Your Ideas, which Tim Ferriss cited as one of the only 4 books that mattered to him in 4-Hour Workweek. So if you trace back, the roots of things, you can find out a lot of this stuff has been figured out. These are principles. Yeah. You want to learn principles, not tactics.
Oh, totally agree with that. I am curious, do you have any principles or philosophies that tend to stay close to top of mind for you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. I mean, I think of them, I think, well, actually it's interesting because I'm about my next podcast I'm going to do is about critical thinking, and I have a list of books. And I kind of was breaking this down to do that podcast episode. So this is top of the mind for me. And I guess I try to think of ways to make it so, it's the 80-20 rule. Like, what are the 20% of things that are going to give you 80% of the results? Because I can manage a smaller range of things better in my mind and elsewhere than I can if I have like the comprehensive list. So I can give people comprehensive lists where I can say, look, these three things maybe are the keys to most of what you need to understand. And I think the three keys are one, you need to be learning new things in this new world, being curious. In my case, that was natural for me. I was always naturally interested in how do things work. Not everything, but things that matter to me. You need to be curious about this world, this particular situation that we're in, that the digital stuff is disrupting, which is creating new challenges and creating new opportunities. And so you need to be curious about how can I leverage those new opportunities? And there are people that you can help you with that because they'll be telling you things and you go, oh, that's an interesting idea. So you got to be open-minded and curious to develop those things. And you need to be open-minded and curious no matter what, because there are challenges too. And those challenges are going to impair your ability to function unless you move to higher ground. So if your business model is you at the lower level of, oh yeah, managing data and I'm processing information, I'd like to get to that critical thinking thing when I have the time, but I'm busy putting out fires. If that's you, the tsunami is going to take you out soon. So you need to seek higher ground, A, to stay alive, and B, preferably to thrive. So curiosity is your friend, and learning new things. You can't stop learning. We're past, oh yeah, I learned that one thing that I'm going to do for the rest of my life, and that job is going to stay here. That's gone. So that's one. And then two is self-sufficiency, which I talked about earlier and I've hinted at. And I think the more self-sufficient you are, the less disruptible you are, the more options you have, and the happier you're going to be, because having lots of options is good. There's a book that I've been reading, and which I will definitely recommend here as well as in the podcast that I'm mentioning. It's called The Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel. And I actually have a copy of it right here because it's not going to show. It's blurred out because I've got the Zoom background.
Oh yeah.
But it is an amazing book, and it just brings together so many different things like decision making, part of which is risk assessment, and it's in the finance area, but if you learn how to do it in the finance area, you can apply that understanding to everywhere else. That's why Charlie Munger, lawyer, good critical thinker, good person who's curious about the world and wanted to learn, he is a person who learned how to apply these kinds of principles, which include psychology, to investment. And if you can make good investment decisions, good finance decisions, you're going to be able to apply those principles elsewhere. And so self-sufficiency is part of that equation. And in the book, he talks about how there's a difference between being rich and wealthy. Rich is you have lots of money. Wealthy is you can do whatever you want as much as you want. And so if you use money correctly and build it up, then you make the right decisions and use the right principles, you will be wealthy. You will be able to do what you want, when you want, how you want. That was my goal when I went out on my own. I didn't know it. I wasn't as clear about it. I just knew I don't care about money. I want options. I want to be able to do things the way I want to. And so I was optimizing for that as much as I could without defining that. If I'd have defined it, I think I would have gotten there sooner, but I'm here now. And I can tell you that this book, after all the stuff I've read, this book really nails it to the extent that I'm reading it, carefully highlighting it. I'm going to reread it and reread it and reread it because it's like the hub for a bunch of other books.
Oh, that's so okay. Hang on, I'll write that down. Wait, Psychology of Money.
It's called The Psychology of Money, and the subtitle is Timeless Lessons on Wealth, Greed, and Happiness. And the author is Morgan Housel, house like the house, and then just add an L at the end. And it, was blurbed or touted by Jason Zweig, who's a Wall Street Journal. And this guy was a Wall Street Journal writer. He's invested, he's made money, but he's also a writer. The writing is an exception. It's an exceptionally well-written book in the top 0.001% of books. but it's blurbed by the following people. I think you know them: Daniel Pink, James
Mhm.
Clear of Atomic Habits fame, and Annie Duke of Thinking in Bets fame.
Mhm. Wow.
And so I was expecting it to be pretty good because other people had recommended it. I am blown away at how good it is.
Cool. Okay. Okay, so the the first principle that's top of mind
Open,
for you is learning,
be curious and
curious.
open minded, and then critical thinking, decision making. And there's a lot of books that you could read. Thinking in Bets
Yeah.
is one. But the psychology of money, I think people can learn to make decisions better when they have something that's in their, that they're dealing with to
Yeah.
make decisions. And the best thing I think is money, because everybody's managing finances, and people tend to do it poorly for predictable reasons.
Yeah.
And Daniel Kahneman's covered this. That's why they gave him a Nobel Prize for economics. So that it's been covered, and a lot of it has to do with psychology. Hence, the name, the psychology of money,
Mhm.
is super important. The other component, I think, is you need to wrap your head around the big picture of what is happening in the world today. There's a lot of stuff that is, tectonic plates are moving rapidly, and there's several books I guess you could read about this, but the best one that's current, and he's somebody who's paying attention to this, so it's a twofer. You'll learn about this person you should follow anyway, and you can read the book. And it's called Post Corona by Scott Galloway.
Hmm.
Scott Galloway is somebody that everybody who wants to understand what's going on in the world today should follow. Follow him on Twitter. He's great on Twitter. Subscribe to his YouTube channel. Listen to his podcasts, one of which he does. I think he has more than one, but one is with Kara Swisher, who's pretty famous in the tech world.
I like her
And
interviews. She's
yeah,
always interesting.
yeah. And
Yeah.
this book, Post Corona, he cranked out pretty quickly, a lot of it based on his blog posts and his thinking that he was already doing. But he is a clear thinker. There's not a sentence that comes out of his mouth that isn't a writer downer. And
Yeah.
he processes a lot of data,
Got
so you don't have to, because I don't like dealing with the data and crunching the numbers, but he does.
Yeah.
And that book, Post Corona, that's your playbook for,
Mm.
here. Let's review what isn't going to work anymore, what's about to crater, and what was stress tested during this pandemic and we know is going to take off. And if you're armed with those things, you're 80% armed.
Yeah. Yeah. I really like that. All three of those are so good. There's things I thought of that I wanted to ask you about with at least the first two. I'll go in order my
Sure.
questions that popped in my head. So, have you ever heard that? I don't know where I first heard this, but the opposite of depression is curiosity, not
Hmm.
happiness.
No,
And
but I
people
like
think
that.
you're either depressed or happy, but the opposite is actually curiosity. And
Mhm.
that has stuck with me ever since I learned that. And you're mentioning how important curiosity is. So it almost seems to, it's important for a lot of things. One of them is well-being. you
Oh
know?
yeah, no, for sure.
Yeah. So I thought that was cool. I was gonna ask if you
Well,
heard
that's
that.
interesting because so my dad was a psychoanalyst, psychiatrist. He
Mhm.
comes from that world, and my mom had emotional trauma problems, and so I've paid attention to that, and I've talked to my dad about depression and people have depression, and so whenever I hear those studies, and I process that information quickly and easily.
Mhm.
And one of the greatest antidotes to depression apparently is activity. Like if
Mm,
you get up and do stuff, you'll
yeah,
be less depressed. So it's like, chicken egg. Well, if you sit there and don't do stuff, it's because you're depressed. Well, if you don't do stuff, you're going to stay depressed. So
right,
go do stuff, right? And doing stuff doesn't just mean physically doing stuff. It could mean going and checking stuff out. So
right.
yeah, curiosity would be an antidote to
Yeah,
depression, right?
yeah, yeah. And I think, uh, but it is hard. So I have my mother has, um, a really hard time also with
Mm-hmm.
depression, and there's just a lot there and always has been, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it is interesting to watch someone you love so much or anyone close to you who is depressed, and just for the sake of this conversation I'll even say clinically depressed. I You see the struggle of being able to even muster up anything to go about curiosity. And I've had those moments myself, just
Yeah.
not chronically like I've
Right.
witnessed. And it's so hard. It's so
Mm-hmm.
hard because sure, but it is what you're saying is when you're in a mode where when you're out of the darkest of the dark, when you even have like a just a flicker in your mind of the possibility of learning or the possibility of activity of some sort, you should act on it, because the
Right.
second that you could do it, it starts to spiral you up instead of the spiral down that can happen so easily when you don't feel like you're in a place to you don't even want to do it.
Right.
um
Right.
so anyway, yeah.
Yeah, and in the extreme level, of course, we're talking about the extreme, but let's just talk about the more common thing, which is
Yeah.
people not believing that they can do something, right? Because what I
Mhm.
see, and I know you see this, we both see this, is a lot of people, you're sitting there going, yeah, you can totally do this thing. And they're like, well, no, I don't think I can. In my case, it's like, I'll tell them, look, you can take advantage of technology. Oh, no, I can't because I don't really like technology. It confuses me. I'm too old. You
Mm.
don't have to like it. You don't have to understand all of it. Just like you don't have to understand how your
Yeah.
car works. You can pull into the gas station, have them change the oil for you. It's the
Right.
same with technology, but what you shouldn't be doing is wasting time
Yeah.
doing the wrong things. So it's
Uh-huh.
not just about being efficient. And so people get that wrong with technology. Oh, I'll use it to be more efficient. No, first be effective. Like don't do things you like. It's the Peter Drucker quote. There's nothing so useless as doing efficiently that which shouldn't be done at all. So it's learning what you should and shouldn't be doing in this fast changing world. And everyone can learn it. It's
Mm.
the Carol Dweck book, the growth mindset.
Yes.
Everyone can learn. And believing that you can learn comes when you learn things that you didn't believe you could do. And you go, oh, look at that. I learned how to do that. That's amazing. And then you will learn, right? So, but you want to get that confidence,
Mm-hmm.
if you need to get it with a coach, then get a coach, because a
Mm-hmm.
coach is going to keep you from going off the rails and wasting time and getting unnecessarily frustrated. Because once you catch the wave, and once you get the gist of what's going on, everyone can learn to do this. I mean, it's not
Mm-hmm.
like only a few people can learn it. What most people are doing wrong doesn't depend on how tech savvy or whatever it is. It depends on them being really focused on doing the right things,
Yeah.
right? Like there's so many things competing for people's attention.
Mm.
It's so easy to get derailed.
Yeah.
That's the problem, is we live in a world, it's like a forest fire and we're
Uh-huh.
surrounded by fires and we can't put them out. So we better learn how to avoid them or throw a tarp over ourselves so that we can survive in the midst of this blaze. That's what it's like in this world of attention grabbing stuff. So you
Yeah.
need to figure out how to maintain your attention, how to focus on the right things, and stay focused on a few of those things
Yeah.
until you get the benefits. And I know, because I've been in your sprint, that's what you help
Mm.
people do. And you help me get better about doing it, because there's something about working with somebody every day, or, in your case, 5 days a week, and
Mhm.
saying, okay, well, what are you working on? Are you still working on that? Yep. Good.
Mhm.
Okay. Did you have any problems working on that? Okay. Let's talk about it. And then you realize, oh, look at that. If I stay focused on something, I get
Mm.
results. And,
Yeah.
you don't need a lot of results all over the place. You need a
Right.
few big results, all of which the things that matter all depend on sustained effort and focus and attention, which is like the most rare element on planet Earth these days.
Yeah, that's so true. It also makes me think too, because there's sometimes we're going for a particular result, but there's times where you just know something isn't quite how it should be.
Mhm.
And it's almost, I think our need at times, or our perceived need for an answer, almost like the urgency or immediacy that you wish an answer would come, squashes creativity or curiosity. It's
Yeah.
like you just are if you just sit in the
Yep.
question for a
Yep.
while, the
Yep.
curiosity is allowed to play. And like, I wonder
Yeah.
about this, or I wonder about this, instead of needing or grasping for like, well, what's next? How do I fix
Yep.
this?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, because we don't like uncertainty. So this is, again, if you go back
Right.
and study our psychology, like this is, don't feel bad if you feel like this, because everybody feels like this. Why? Because it's factory installed in every human being that we need to make decisions quickly. We don't like the uncertainty. Well,
Yeah.
okay, that was before there was a digital world. And now as a digital world, it's like a pinball arcade. And all these things are flying at us. So we want to make a lot of these decisions just to get rid of the problem quickly. So then we get in the habit of making decisions quickly, but it's a whack-a-mole game. Like
Yeah.
there's going to be 17 more decisions after you make the one you made. But the ones that matter most, you're right, you need to dwell on, you need to sit with. And this is where I love the OODA model, which I talked about in one of my podcasts, the observe, orient, decide, and act, which was developed by this guy, John Boyd, who taught fighter pilots how to make better decisions while in dogfights. So the time frame of their OODA decision making is nanoseconds or seconds, but it's the same concept. It's like, don't decide until you have observed what's really going
Yeah.
on, right? Take
Yeah.
stock of the situation. So if you have time, use the time to take full stock of the situation, see what's really going on. So be non-reactive, step one, and observe. Step two, orient, put things in perspective. Take a look at everything else that's going on around it and see, is this the most important thing? And that's what, when Peter Drucker says, don't waste time, this would be the methodology for not doing the wrong thing. Oh, yeah, okay, I was about to do this. Well, that was going to be a waste of time. Like, I mean, in
Right.
marketing, it would be, oh, I need to make more money. So I need to get more followers, because then I'll have more attention. I'll buy Facebook ads, or I'll go on social media and I'll get a lot of people to follow me. And then I'll have people and I'll make money. Okay. No, that's not going to work. Your system for getting more clients or customers needs to be: one, who do I want to work with?
Mm.
Who do I not want to work with?
Mm-hmm.
What kind of work do I like doing? Let me create messaging to attract those kind of people. Is that going to be something I'm going to do in an afternoon? Nope. It's going to take a long time. You're always going to be working on it in the beginning, and at some point maybe stop work. But it's going to take a while to get that. And if you get that, then at the end, go get the attention of people if you need more attention. But you might not. It might be that if you send the right message out, and this was like my epiphany, I accidentally sent the right message out when I started a blog. And then I started studying marketing and trying to be strategic, and became wooden and clinical and not as effective. And then I realized, like, no, why don't I just be me? Why don't I just speak like I speak, not hire people to speak for me, and say what needs to be said? But of course I had to figure that out, right? Like, and that's
Right.
hard. You work with people. This is where the critical thinking and the thinking skills, that's why they're so valuable,
Mm-hmm.
because thinking doesn't mean just reflexively responding to things. It means understanding with depth, like
Yes.
going below the surface, seeing root causes. Like, that's what people will pay you. I mean, even if they don't know that's what you're doing, the results you deliver by doing that will be way better.
Yes.
So that's what people
Definitely.
should focus on.
Definitely. This kind of, the other thing I was going to say to you, it feels like connected to this, about the second principle you gave. You talked about rich is different than wealth. Being rich is
Mm-hmm.
different than being wealthy. And you gave the difference there. And it feels like with getting rich, people, that's almost like it's probably a moving target, but there's like a destination that it is not their life. They're trying to
Mm-hmm.
get that life, right? And then being wealthy is something that, no matter where you are on the journey of accumulating wealth, and I mean like all kinds of wealth, not just money, you can you can feel wealthy if you just wake up to the truth of some things. You can feel
Yeah.
wealthy in any given moment. You may not be able to feel rich in any given moment, but that's kind of the beauty. I think being wealthy is I mean, I don't think there's anything wrong with being rich, but being wealthy, is a
Yeah.
different game, a deeper, more fulfilling game. That's what life's
Right.
about.
You
Yeah.
could be wealthy with very little money.
Oh
That's
yeah.
the thing.
Oh
And
yeah.
Tim Ferriss, I don't know if I think this was in the 4 Hour Work Week, but I came across it recently and somebody cited it as being in the 4 Hour Work Week. So I have to go back and check. But I've told the story. I forgot where I'd gotten it from, but it's probably from Tim Ferriss. And it was about how, there's this guy who's really wealthy. He's like a, money guy in New York, and he goes down to fish at this village in, let's say, Mexico, and he meets this guy named, Julio, and he likes Julio, and he's telling Julio, you're doing good here, but you could do a lot better. If you come to New York, I could get you a job in the mailroom. You could start there, and he's like, well, what would I do then? He goes, well, then you go up, and eventually, you'd make all this money. And I said, well, if I had all this money, what would I do? This? Well, then you could afford to come to a nice place like this.
Mm,
Ta-da. Like he's
yeah.
already there. He's happy. He's there. You, rich guy, went there because you want to spend your time and have a quality experience. He does this every day,
Yeah.
and it doesn't cost him a lot of money. He's already there. But like, people will chase those things without understanding what they're chasing,
Right.
and not because they're not clear about whether they want money or wealth. And usually if people want money, it's either because they want the wealth, the freedom, and there's a certain level of amount of money you have to have. I mean, I think the number in the US supposedly is like $72,000 or 74,000, and that's the level at which you can be happy because you can afford things you need to afford. But either they want the wealth or they want status. Now, if you want status, yeah, that game's never going to end. You'll
Mm-mm,
be playing the money
mm-mm.
game and the status chasing game forever. But I don't really think people are satisfied by status. I think that's a substitute for something they haven't discovered. But I don't know. Maybe that's just because I don't want status. That for me, it doesn't make sense. But
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
status is a huge thing to try to, because it's, see, again, self sufficiency. If I want status, what does that mean? Well, I have to play this game where I don't really control a lot of things. It's all about other people's opinion. Whereas if I go, well, I'm going to train myself not to care about other people's opinion, other than the people who I'm going to use to understand better the things I need to understand, those people's opinion I will care about. But that's simply so that I can learn. If it's to give me approval, oh, well, now I've got an extra thing that's extra load I have to carry. I want to be as free of those loads. I want to be as free as from unnecessary dependencies as I can be.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm optimizing for, because that's
Mm-hmm.
wealth to me.
Mm-hmm. That's it's one of the reasons why on this podcast I don't want to guest. It's not that I'm not willing to talk to people all walks
Mhm.
or all points in the journey, but the only guests I want on the show are people who don't need more from their business. More like they
Mm.
don't like there's a graspiness and
Right.
that's very natural. I mean, truly, when you're lifting something off the ground, the most important thing is new customers. Like
Mhm. Yeah, you
it's
have to. I mean, you
required,
do have
right?
to. Yeah, you do
Yeah.
need money for some things. Yeah.
Yeah. And there's a bit of a maybe more, maybe not for you. You definitely seem like a Zen master to me, but I think there's more of a grind and a hustle to lifting something off of the ground.
Oh, for
And
sure.
yeah. And so that, I wanted people who have done that and they
Hmm.
aren't in that phase anymore. And they're the most interesting people for me to talk to because of the perspective and the experience and the wisdom that you gain from going through that. And you're at a point now where now it's more about with your business. If you don't decide to retire and go sit on a beach, which most people that do this kind of work won't, because there's something about it that they love with the building and all of that. So if you keep working beyond when you need uh money, so to speak, then it gets interesting because you are playing a different game. It's not about the money anymore. Of course, it is from a bottom line perspective for the business, but you have more the ability to more aggressively put your foot on the gas with ideas and that maybe would have been too risky earlier because you needed some sort of security with what the result
Right.
was going to be. And
Right.
so, yeah, I mean, okay, you said definitely. When you were lifting this off the ground, can you give any examples or just your experience of the way that you thought back
Hmm.
then that
Yeah.
you had to think in order to lift
Yeah.
versus the way that you think now?
Yeah.
And wait, one other caveat. It has to be something. Well, what I'm curious about is it's not that it was wrong. And it's not that, like, if future Ernie, if now Ernie could give advice to past Ernie because of what you've learned, because of now what you understand, that might have been helpful in lifting something off the ground.
Mhm.
But you just knew what
Yep.
you knew at the time and there was a hustle to it, right? I don't know. I'm
Yeah.
curious what you would impart.
Yeah. I know exactly what that is because not only do I know it for myself, but I see it with the people that I try to help because,
Yeah.
I know you see this same thing because as we talked about it, the things that are going to move the needle and give you this wealth or riches, if that's what you want for that matter,
Mhm.
they're long game things.
Yes.
There's nothing that I can think of that's short game that's worth dealing with until you figure out the long game stuff first. The problem with the long game, and this is why delayed gratification is the word we use, it's like we want to be gratified right away. We want to know that we got the thing. But there's another part of gratification that's not just the getting the thing, it's also knowing that you're on the right path to get the thing, right? And how the hell are you going to know whether you're on the right path for this heavy lift that you're going to do that's going to require all this momentum? I love your analogy that you've used before with me about talking about 80% of the fuel necessary to go to the moon is used up in the first whatever seconds. And that's what it is. There's a lot of work that you're putting in on the front end, and you have to be aimed at the right target. And, so it's just people aren't going to stumble on that, is what I think. So, like, I groped around and I went in a lot of different directions before I went in the better direction. And so of course, would like to help people not do that. But I know that what they struggle with is even though intellectually, and even if they trust me and say, yeah, I know it intellectually and I trust Ernie or Melissa, when they say that this is what we need to do, they get fidgety. They get insecure because
Mhm.
until this has worked for you, one of these, long range projects, you don't really trust that it's going to work for you. You have the imposter syndrome. You have the you're like, it works for other people. It doesn't work for me. So until you see that start to work for you and you go, oh, yeah, okay,
Mhm.
that's the deal. And then once you've had it work, you kind of stop and think, well, of course, that's going to be the secret. Of course it is. This is the secret to the universe. It's going to be the secret because what isn't the secret? Trying everything that everybody else is doing and running around in circles. That's not going to be the secret. The secret is going to be something that people aren't doing. It doesn't have to be things that people couldn't figure out easily. Those are secrets too. But the weirdest secret is the one where, yeah, it's sitting right there. Warren Buffett will tell you how to make money. It's not a secret. Other people will tell you the secret, like compound interest is the secret,
Yes.
and that's one of the things that in the psychology of money he talks about. Compounding works constantly everywhere, but who wants to do it? It takes a long time. People,
Right.
they don't want to do that. Okay, well, then you're not going to. That's the secret.
Yeah.
And there's no heavy lift there. It's just that one's just you have to keep doing it.
Yeah.
It's not you put a lot of money in today. Well, you have it. So you put in as much as you can constantly. Don't miss a day if you can possibly miss a day. That's what's going to buy you the margin. That's what's going to create the wealth. Absolutely guaranteed. And then you can take some risks, but the kind of risks you can't take are the ones that take you out of the game altogether. And
Yeah.
here's where rich people, and maybe wealthy people too, they get taken out of the game. They blow it up. They think they're so smart. Their ego takes control of them. They make a big bet and they're wrong and they didn't have any room for error.
Mhm.
Margin for error is another principle that Morgan Housel talks about in Psychology of Money. You must have margin for error. Now, there's, you don't have to worry about that with compounding. That's going to take care of the job for you. But in other areas where you're making risky decisions, you cannot bet on things. I mean, it's like he uses the example of Russian roulette in the book. He's like, yeah, you can make a lot of money in Russian roulette, but what are the consequences of losing?
Right.
So like, just think of that. Like, and it's not hard to do the right thing. What's hard is to keep doing the right thing.
Right. I was just listening to somebody the other day talk about they used Charlie Munger, uh, but Warren Buffett talks about too, compound interest. And Charlie Munger was saying when it comes to habits or just the small things, the things that don't take much time, that don't that, but it's the same thing that there's it you get compound interest. It's the same effect that happens with
Yep.
those habits or the what I've
Yeah.
been referring to lately is the wee things. It's the wee things, but you have to keep doing them consistently. And if you stop, it's the same as taking like your investment out of the asset and then
Yep.
moving. You don't get
Yep.
the compound interest. And so
Yep.
you keep playing the short game
Yep.
that's not going to get you forever. So I love that you said the long game. I actually the podcast that went out yesterday was called the play the long game because it's
That's it.
this, right? Like,
Yep.
and I'm still on a journey with learning. I certainly
Right.
don't know all there is to know or have all the experience in the world, but I do understand that the weighing things out from that perspective of the long game versus the short game is the way to go. And it's sometimes
Yep.
it's hard because you want a quick win
Mhm.
or you feel like you need a quick win. And so you start to make stupid decisions because
Yeah. Yeah.
short game
Right.
decisions. Yeah.
Right.
So it's having that view. Yeah. Um, okay. Do you have a few more minutes?
Yeah.
Okay. I would love to ask you what's a barrier that you are currently experiencing or dealing with that you're trying to maybe you're just sitting with it, like you're kind of in that phase of this will get figured out, but this is something that I want to figure out.
Mhm. I think the biggest one is health. Like, I'm not really doing things to be healthy. Like, there was a time, and we talked about this right before the podcast started. Like, there's a time when I was going to yoga regularly, and this isn't because of the pandemic, but it's just kind of, there's been a lot of different things, and that's not my. I replaced my morning routine of running and working out with a morning routine of mental stuff. So I journal, I meditate, and I've said to myself, okay, well then I'm going to start doing some activity stuff when I feel like I have the time. And for a long time, I was doing things where I was spinning my wheels. And then once I started to realize, like, oh, no, I shouldn't have been doing that. I knew better. I shouldn't do that. Now I see things coming together. And I guess there will be this moment, and this, maybe it could be right now or tomorrow, but I'm not in a hurry to figure it out because I'm in good health. I'm not, dragging. And I feel like whatever I can, I need to do will shed pounds and bring me back up to speed once I start doing it. But I'm optimizing for other things because, I only have so much time. So the things I'm trying to put in place with my time are things that are going to become perpetual motion machines, flywheel effect things in the business.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'll go like, well, I've got this extra time. Okay, what am I going to use it for? Well, I'm going to work out and work on my health more. Now, that doesn't explain the nutrition because, in nutrition, I should be better about this. That one doesn't require time. That just requires making better choices. But yeah, that's an area where I know
Yeah.
I need to focus on that.
Yeah. That makes total sense. And I number one, I admire how you're not in a hurry to figure that out. I'm asking myself that more and more. Like, why are you in a hurry? Why are you in a hurry? Like, maybe there's something I want to change. And so my tendency is to make a drastic call.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I'm playing the short game. That's exactly what I'm doing when I
Yeah.
do that. Like the other day, I'm similarly with health stuff. I haven't really been paying attention to my physical health the way that I have in the past. And so I had this thought the other day, oh, I'm going to do 75 hard. What? Like, are you kidding me? Like,
Right.
That is not I mean, I could totally do that, but I know better than to just
Mhm.
like let the pendulum swing the other way quickly. Like, okay, wait, let's just not. And so I appreciate that you're saying as well, like, I'm contemplating it. I will
Mhm.
figure it out. And that feels, it's a healthy approach, you know?
Well, and what you said about small things. So when I say, okay, I'm going to put that as a list on my things to do, I know that the way I'm going to do it is ramp up slowly in the James, clear atomic habits way. Because if I try to do it too fast, well, there you go. Like that's kind of risk and taking yourself out of the game. What if I
Yes,
injure myself because I'm pushing too hard? I don't
totally.
need to push too hard. I just need to say, okay, this is going to be how we start with the baby steps. And then every
Yeah,
day I'll just ramp up slowly because I'm playing the long game. I'm not playing the
right,
in a hurry game. But
right.
I feel like you do. Like I'm like, oh yeah, I'm going to join the gym, and because that's what we do. That is the
That's
monkey brain.
motivation.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and it's the
that's,
default setting to switch to that mode. So you
yes.
have to train yourself to be non-reactive and slow paced when that's what's called for. And
Yeah.
it wasn't any easier for me to learn how to do it than it is for anybody. But I knew that's one where I was like, I'm prioritizing for that because
Hmm.
that will pay compound interest long term
Yes.
in a bunch of different places.
Yeah. And I think too, having some sense of whether it's just a buddy, but having some sense of community around the small steps, which I know that's what I do with sprints, but that's not what I'm talking about. But the small steps, like even with health, I was just thinking, oh, maybe I wonder if Ernie be in for like a check-in every day if we did start something similar. But and maybe not, right? But I do think that there's something about that the monkey you were saying it's the monkey brain when we get all this motivation to make the change and
Mm-hmm.
that's a good idea, I'm going to do that, and it's
Mm-hmm.
this intense regimen,
Mm-hmm.
then the motivation's going to go away, bank on
Right.
it. And
Right.
then what? Now you're stuck in this thing where you're supposed to spend whatever 2 hours a day giving yourself
Right.
to like, what are you setting yourself up for? That is the short
Right.
game, even if you feel like it's not. But I think accountability is like, that's never going to win. That in my opinion, for me, speaking for myself and many people that I see, do what you want, right? But like that extreme nature
Mm-hmm.
is like flame up, flame out kind of
Yeah.
stuff. So
Yeah.
the long game is the small things. How can you set yourself up to be engaged in
Mm-hmm.
the small things? Because it doesn't,
Yeah.
there isn't a kickback right away often.
Well, you need accountability. You're right. I mean, or most people, most of the time, need
Right.
accountability.
Yeah.
And and I know you'll know this book, Triggers by Marshall Goldsmith. Is that
I have
the
not
book?
read it.
Oh,
Somebody else
okay.
just mentioned it.
Because I mean, he's one of those guys who, it's an interesting book and an interesting person to study because he basically gets paid a lot of money to coach people who are super high level. And I think I remember reading in the book that like one of the ways he got into this was he would go to like, let's say this, I'm making this up, but let's say it's the CEO of Coca-Cola,
Mm-hmm.
and they say, I really need help, and they hire him. Well, the way he got, or one of the ways that he got people to understand that there was value there was he'd say, look, here's what I charge for this, but you know what? I'm going to do it for you for a year for free. And if you don't get the results you're looking for, then you don't have to pay me. But if, so now the person knows, of course, they're going to really do the job. He has confidence because he's not going to get paid unless he gets results. So he'd get results for these people. But like he broke down the key thing was almost like the net promoter score where they go, oh, look, this is just one question. And the one thing that he did that made the biggest difference, which in the book he says, you can do this too without hiring me or anybody else, is get accountability. So you have a person, and every day you say, and you don't have to get on the phone with them, you could do it by email, and just say in the beginning, morning, I'm going to do this today. And at the end of the day, you email them or they ask, and, you email and say, yep, I did it, or no, I didn't do it. You don't even have to necessarily explain, I think was how it worked. It's the mere fact that somebody is monitoring will cause people to do things that they would otherwise not do. Okay, well,
Right.
that's a really powerful insight. And this
Mhm.
is being given to you by somebody who isn't, selling, cheese and crackers. He did it at a high level, does it at a high level. And he's saying, here's the 80-20-20-80 rule. This is the key component of that. Now, if you don't feel comfortable doing that, it's better to have somebody who can give you advice,
Mhm.
who's been down, so there's other things that make it better, which is of course
Mhm.
why, you have work, because people hire you, to give more than just accountability, strategic planning, all that kind of stuff. But the accountability, yeah, that's really important,
It's a
because where you
big
can't if you can't provide it to yourself, where are you going to get it? Not from an
right.
app.
Yeah. No, that's so true. People, that's one of the number one things people say about what they're so pumped that they got out of this. Yes, the result, but they attribute it to the accountability. And I
Mhm.
don't think they're wrong. I pushed so hard for so long not to, I don't want to just be an accountability coach. That's not what I'm going to market myself for, but that's what people value
Right.
the most once they're in.
Right.
I mean,
Well, I mean, having been through your sprint, I know that's not just what you do. And I mean, I don't know if you'd agree with what I'm about to say, but I think what I saw happening with other people and with me was, yeah, there's accountability. That's important. But also, you were helping people understand how to think about this so that they could think about it themselves. And that, I've decided recently, is, I've rebranded, by deciding, what am I really trying to help people do? And it's, technology. Yeah. Okay. Technology, that's at the surface level. But what I'm really trying to do is help people who want to shift their thinking in outside the box ways. Because the old box, the traditional law firm box, the traditional business box, that's over. Digital has disrupted that. So I would rather help people think about that better. But I see that that's what you're doing, because it's not, the thinking about it better is not dependent on technology. The thinking about it better is pausing and reflecting. Okay, well, why did I think that was going to work? Oh, okay, well, and so unless you get somebody working with you to develop that muscle, it's, more people aren't going to do that. I was able to kind of figure a lot of it out on my own, but when I entered into mastermind groups and this was being discussed, either the person asked me a question and stopped me in my tracks and made me think, huh, okay, why was I thinking that?
Mm.
Or I got to observe other people getting stopped in their tracks who were like super high level people. I was like, whoa, okay, well, people need coaches. I mean, Steve Jobs and Eric Schmidt of Google had a coach. Bill Campbell, that's a famous book, The $1 Trillion Coach. And why did they pay this guy a lot of money? Or actually, I don't even think they did pay him.
I think you're right.
He did it because he loved doing it. He had all the money, and to him, wealth was working with high level people and helping them. But they needed him.
Yeah.
What do they need him for? They're smart people.
Right.
Eric Schmidt can figure why, because people need coaches. Why can't Tiger Woods figure out what's wrong with his swing?
Right.
Why does LeBron James have? Why do people have coaches? Because they can't do the thing and see themselves doing the thing and
Yes.
spot the problems while they're doing the thing.
Yeah.
That's life, right?
Yeah, totally. Have you seen people probably sick of me saying this, but have you seen Never Give In, a documentary?
No,
Um, you should look it up. I think it's on
I haven't.
Paramount Plus only, but you can
Oh,
get Paramount Plus for free for a week
oh,
if
okay,
you have
all right.
Amazon. Anyway, uh it's about a coach, like arguably the greatest coach that's ever lived, at least maybe up until recently. EPL soccer coach, football
Oh,
coach.
okay.
And he's Scottish, so you need to turn the subtitles on because it's a really it's
Right.
hard to catch everything. But oh, the way that he gets out of people,
Mhm.
really high level players that are best of the best in the world, and he can turn them on by, he said, some people call it, in his awesome accent, some people call it psychology. I call it management. It's just like you're managing the way that they're perceiving things, and not because you're brainwashing, it's just you're asking the right questions, you're pushing
Right.
the right buttons, and how important that can be. Um and what a skill. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know. I think it's a skill that can be developed over time, but it's really good. I feel like you'd enjoy that.
Oh, yeah. No, I put it down on my list of things to check out.
Yeah. Every time I talk to you, I have a list when I walk away. I love
So
it.
we both do. This is why we can't meet every day, because we would
I
then we would
know.
never get
You
anything
never get
done.
anything done. Yeah, exactly. I know that's so true. Man, Ernie, thank you so much for coming on and just sharing how your brain works and how you think about things.
Yeah. No,
It's
I
always
love
good
talking
to,
to you.
yeah, same. So for everybody listening, most people probably know exactly who you are, where to find, but
Yeah.
can you just share a little bit about your business and what you do and where they can find you?
Yeah. Unfortunately, I have two websites, but either one will get you to the same place.
Okay.
If you Google Ernie the Attorney, you'll find the Ernie the Attorney website. If you Google Law Firm Autopilot, you'll probably find the Law Firm Autopilot website. I have a bunch of free resources there. And, my way of trying to help people get started is to do as much as I can by explaining upfront. I do have like a PDF download that I'm working on revising.
Mm.
And it's really more about the emails that come out afterwards, because I feel like if you want to shift your thinking, it ain't going to happen overnight. And a lot of things need to be repeated and reinforced so that you can internalize them, because the principles that matter most are the ones that you don't have to think about. You just train yourself to act upon them. And so when it comes to decision making, to the psychology behind that, to marketing and how all these things fit together, there's a lot to cover. And so I just do it by sending out a stream of emails that I'm constantly tweaking and updating and improving.
Mhm.
So yeah, that's the way to do it. Or you
If
can
you,
listen to my podcast. That's also another option.
yes, it's a great podcast. If you were to sum up, it's so hard, I think, in in a sentence, what you do for attorneys or for law firm owners, what is it?
I help lawyers shift their thinking away from the traditional that's eroding and becoming less effective,
Mm,
to new things that are effective. And yet at the same time, we're also going to talk about the things that haven't shifted, like compounding, isn't a
mm,
new thing that's been around forever. So it's understanding which of the new things do I need to leverage and which ones should I leverage first? And how
mhm,
do I think about the digital world? One of the big insights that I've had, which seems so obvious now, and I mean, it was obvious, but I didn't understand the import of it, is that the thing that makes operating with all this digital stuff, and doing our knowledge work so difficult is that, and this is so obvious, digital information is invisible and intangible. If I want to observe the digital information, I have to open my computer. It's like a window into that world, and then I can access it and I can see it and work with it. So and this is another point that Morgan Housel made in Psychology of Money, because he was saying, well, how do we learn how to manage money? You can't observe people doing it. He said humans learn by imitation. And so you can't imitate people and learn them doing digital stuff at a high level, because where would you observe it? Like the only two chances you have are if you're standing behind them, the right person, for long enough and watching what they do, which they're probably not going to let you do that, or they screen share, which happens very rarely. So how are you going to learn these principles and internalize them? It's very hard.
mhm,
And so
mm.
that's when I realized, like, I'm not going to teach people tactics. And I will help them. I will say, yeah, acuity booking or whatever is good, or, you should be paperless. The snap scanner is good. But you need to think about how do you learn what you need to learn? How do you get information quickly? How can you be self-sufficient? How can you use outsourcing? And these are principles problems, not tactics problems.
Yeah. Which principle focus on principles is playing the long game.
Yep.
Tactics
Yep.
is a short game.
Yep. And you do need tactics. That's true.
Yes.
But you need
100%.
to know after the principle,
Yes.
which tactic am I going to use to execute that principle?
Right. Principle driven tactic execution.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's write that down. That should be the title of this podcast episode.
There you go. That's great. Um, well, yeah, this has been awesome. Thank you so, so much. And I mean, we'll have more conversations in the future. So
For
this isn't
sure.
it, but
For
and
sure.
maybe someday, hopefully sooner than later, do something in person and live, which would be
Yeah.
super cool.
I would love that. Oh man,
Me,
let's talk about that.
yes, 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 definitely. All right.
Cool.
Thank you, Ernie.
Yeah, thanks.